Okay. Chris Vaughn from FEMA has stepped out for just a moment, so we're going to get started and wait for him to come back. We can all pretend, if you'd like, that he's missed something absolutely devastatingly significant about his agency. So when he returns, he's probably just gone for a bio break in the bathroom. Hi, my name's Nigel Snowd. I'm a product manager at Google as a part of Google.org, the philanthropic part of Google in our crisis response team, and a few other bits and pieces. And formerly, I used to work for UNOCHA, various UN agencies, and do a bunch of research around humanitarian collaboration as well as running responses internationally. So this panel is meant to be looking at, okay, now that we've got data with various levels of veracity that have come in as per the last discussion, what can we do about it? How do agencies handle and move beyond what's been a bunch of ad hoc responses and relationships, usually done personally, sometimes over Skype, sometimes over other pieces of and channels of communication? But how does this get turned into something that's actionable by agencies? I did have a follow-up question from the previous panel, which sort of leads into this, which is the extent that it is about agency action versus encouraging citizen action. Because the last panel was about veracity for agencies to determine what to do. There's an element to which the agencies have a role, if you like, and formal responders have a role in feeding back to the public channels to say, what is the veracity of the public information that's being spread no matter what you do? So those elements on Twitter that are going wild aren't just informing your own action, they're informing public action. And so one interesting piece of example I'd put in here, and it's almost a challenge to the people on the panel as well as about the relationships, which is a New Zealand first responder from Christchurch had noted that as a part of their public response to the earthquake, they'd started to use, I was having a discussion with them sort of a couple of months ago, they'd started to use unverified as something when they're forwarding comments on Twitter. They had to make the choice about, do I not comment on this? Do I not note that there's a piece of potentially significant information here? Or do I actually make some response but note that it is actually unverified? It's a very qualitative statement, but it actually gets you back into the center of the action because people would rather trust an official source than an unofficial source, and you're able to then moderate a conversation. And that's just one means of providing feedback, and it's a very informal one. But just to introduce our panel here, we've got Tim Bryce, who's Senior Meteorologist with the National Weather Service at NOAA. Hi, Tim. Chris, who's Public Information Officer with the Portland National Interagency Fire Center for the NEMO team on the US Forest Service. Shadrock, who's a GIS analyst at GeoCenter for the US Agency for International Development, USAID. And Chris Vaughn, who's GIO for FEMA. Hi. We were going to make a joke at your expense while you're out, but we decided not to. So I'll hand it over to the panelists, perhaps just going left to right to make some comments, and then we'll go for as many questions as we can from the field and from the floor.
Hi, I'm Shadrock. I'm with the GeoCenter in the Office of Science and Technology. I'll be brief, but I want to contextualize what I have to say a little bit, because a vast majority of the work that I do is not in a crisis situation. It's in international development, which is important in its own ways, but it isn't that critical sort of instant, short temporal zone that you have to deal with in crisis response. And our role is really to try and help build understanding of geographic information sciences and geographic information and data into missions and into operating units for better program planning, for better development response. Somewhat as an outlier experience, I ended up being the humanitarian information manager for, I guess, what would be comparatively a relatively small disaster in the Congo with the UN in March. And there was a munitions dump that blew up in a town and leveled part of the town and displaced about 30,000. Official numbers of dead were a couple hundred. I think it's safe to say that those are underestimated. But being in that position was really, really good because it made me throw out everything I thought I knew about what it would like to be in that position. And true learning is always very difficult, but I had to really reevaluate a lot about what I thought I knew about what it might be like to be in that position. So one of the things that I really wanted to start working on was how can I take some of the questions that I see responders and I see the crisis community asking itself and bring those into an environment where it's not time critical and try and start working on these issues. So we had a situation where we had a USAID operating unit, it was the Development Credit Authority, was really interested in mapping financial information that they have all over the world. And they have a data set that they'd put together that was, the locational part of it was a mess. So we were working with them to build their capacity, and they were really interested in using some new techniques for this. So we ended up, and I'm using sort of the loose, slippy term, crowdsourcing, to do essentially data cleanup and data mining in these data to correct them. And we went through this process, really wanting to record everything that we did. Again, trying to respond to a lot of the questions that I'd heard previously. We had fantastic volunteers. We worked with GIS Corps. My colleague Sheree Ahami is here and speaking later from GIS Corps. Worked with Standby Task Force. We worked with the crowd, in a loose sense, volunteers that we just were able to get online to help us go through and clean up these data. And we documented everything that we did. We did an accuracy assessment. We took very careful metrics about what our volunteers were doing. We recorded the policy challenges that we had, the legal challenges that we had, the organizational challenges that we had, everything we could possibly think of that might be useful. All of the data, all of the maps are online. The case study that we did is online that documents all of this in the hopes that it can respond to some of these questions in a non-crisis environment, but at least in an area where we can maybe have a little more room to try and play and figure out some of these issues. So this just wrapped up in July. The data are now officially on the USAID website. There are problems with the data. The accuracy assessment on the crowdsourced data was 84%, which in geospatial terms is actually not bad if you do land cover assessments, other types of positional accuracy. It really depends on what you're looking for, but we were very happy with that. And is being currently used by the Development Credit Authority as their authoritative data set. So that's just to contextualize my remarks. Look forward to hearing from other panels.
I do work for the National Weather Service. I'm a forecaster, so I'm down on the ground doing forecasts. And our advantage is everyone loves to tweet about the weather. Everyone likes to put out tweets. But the challenge for the Weather Service in the last 2 years is how do we get that information? People like to tweet things like it's really windy here, which is just completely useless information. Some people will like to tweet that's something kind of, they'll tweet something that's kind of helpful, like it's raining cats and dogs at my house. Well, we don't know where you are, but we know it's raining heavy somewhere. So that is at least a little bit of information. And then sometimes you'll see tweets, and we've seen tweets that are very helpful, like I work at the Midtown Mall and there's a tornado just touched down across the field from us. Well, there you have a specific location and a specific event going on. So the challenge for the Weather Service in the last few years has been to where to find this information. Is it worth our time to try to dig it out? We were discussing the problems with Twitter. Twitter is has been a great advantage for the Weather Service, but there are other platforms that we are exploring, Facebook, Google Plus with the Hangouts. We're also looking at having third-party monitors, the VOST concept, T-Spotter in the state of Tennessee. They aggregate weather information via Twitter and other social media platforms and then filter it and then send it to us. The advantages for the Weather Service is that we have forecasters are used to dealing with complex and multiple input sources. So we're used to getting lots of different information coming in at us from different directions. And we're very good, forecasters are very good at very quickly filtering out the good and the bad information. We have a bunch of adaptive and innovative people. When there's a problem or that needs to be solved, the Weather Service, when it comes at least to weather information, we're very good at solving those problems. And we have a genuine need for the information. So we're always looking to try to harvest it. Disadvantages for the Weather Service are it's a culture that's been built on just pushing out information. We push out warnings, we push out our forecasts, and we're not so keen on people calling us or giving us information. When the phone rings, I know forecasters look at it like, I just wish you'd be quiet. And the same thing I've seen with the new Facebook pages all the offices have rolled out and all the new Twitter accounts that all the National Weather Service offices have. I keep getting different offices going, okay, now that I've got the Twitter account, how do I automate sending our products to it? And I tell them, don't do that. Twitter in particular is a social media, and the social part of it means that you as a person need to get on there and interact. And so the challenge is to kind of a change of mindset as far as getting away from this push and trying to receive information. Not all of it is always good. In the forecasting games, you occasionally miss a forecast, and people are not shy to let you know that. So I think a lot of our forecasters need to develop a thicker skin. Other things that are making it a challenge for at least for the Weather Service, and I'm sure for other federal agencies, is government rules and regulations are either slowing us down or stifling innovation. I don't know how many times I've tried to roll out a new idea only to be told, that's against the law. We can't do that. You can't put that on a government computer. And it gets very frustrating. I would like to see a way that we can work around some of these issues so that we can continue to innovate, but yet uphold all the laws and regulations of the United States. One other last disadvantage that I've seen in the Weather Service has been senior management at Weather Service headquarters has been, in the past, slow to embrace social media. I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, they've realized the advantages of it and have begun to come around, and I've been glad to see that. But without support from regional headquarters and Washington headquarters, it can make, again, a challenging to try to innovate. But I am glad to say that things have changed in the last 2 or 3 years, and we are getting better support out in the field. So right now, the Weather Service has cast a wide kind of net. We've thrown a lot of spaghetti up on the walls, and we're just trying to see what sticks as far as our agency goes. Is it worth our time and our effort? Does it improve the forecasts and our warnings? Can the information be harvested and incorporated efficiently? And like we've kind of been discussing here, can we trust the information? These are the issues that the Weather Service has been dealing with and looking at. And I look forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say and discuss.
Hi, I'm Chris Erickson. I'm honored to be here a little bit out of my element. I'm a ground pounder, as it were, in the Forest Service. I'm a first responder. We don't use the word algorithm in fire camp very often. So, and math terrifies me. So I have to say that, let me explain who I'm with to give you some sort of a reference. I am with the Forest Service, which is under USDA, if you're not familiar with that, not under Department of Interior, as many think. NEMO stands for National Incident Management Organization. I am on one of 4 teams. Each of those teams has 7 people, just the command and general staff. So there are only 28 of us in the country. And the difference between us and a regular Type 1 team, we are a Type 1 team. That means we manage the largest, most complex wildland fires in the country. There are 16 other Type 1 teams that have 60 or 70 members. They are collateral duty teams, meaning they have real jobs during the day as a hydrologist or a fire behavior person, or maybe not even in fire at all. And after they come together for a fire event, they go back to their regular job. So they don't have the ability to take things from what they learn in camp in real time to policy. The NEMO teams, each 7-member team, we are full-time incident management teams. We don't do anything but this. And we work for the Washington office right across the mall. We are virtual. However, I live in Alaska. So we are called together to work on incidents. I just came from one on Monday to come here. We don't do anything but that, and that's when I say I'm the person in camp, in a town, in a community with 800 pissed off people because they don't have any information. They're yelling at me. So my needs are very different from some of what your needs are, but I utilize what you're telling me and what you learn about on the ground. The challenges that I have, like I say, with the 4 teams that I have, only one on each team is a public information officer. There are only 4 of us. I'm the only one who uses social media. So I'm an army of 1 trying to make a difference in my agency, which I might add doesn't allow us to use social media. So that said, I'm using it anyway. I may be looking for a job, so if anyone, but I believe it's important when you're communicating with the public that you have to meet the demand and the need for the information the way they want it. I also believe, like we're talking about here with crowdsourcing, there is information out there that I can use. Part of this is how we define crowdsourcing. We discussed that a little bit. For me, is it just for the crowd, by the crowd? meaning the crowd supplies the information that the crowd needs and it's put on this common place? Is it monitoring social media for rumors and comments? And then I utilize that information, which I do. We have Facebook pages started when I get a comment back, or I should say we heavily engage with the VOST, who does all my work for me, because of course we can't train people because we're not allowed to do it. So we don't have very many people. So we use the volunteer corps to take care of that for us. When I get information back, I can respond to that. I can even respond to it operationally and tactically. If someone says, there's ash falling in my yard, I need someone to come and help, I can go to operations, find out where they live, and I can do that person by person. My caution is 99% of the people out there, in terms of supplying actual operational information to be used for tactical strategic decisions from the public, and I'm separating this by the public as opposed to other internal cooperators, is that 99% of the time they're wrong. Their perception of the threat in a wildland fire is wrong, because smoke can travel 100 miles. I mean, we can have ash falling on a town dark enough to put out the streetlights, and there's no fire within 50 miles of them. So the perception of threat and danger to a private citizen is usually wrong. Therefore, the accuracy of that call is very much off. The other concern I have is, if we create a forum for people to tell us they feel threatened or endangered, do we have an obligation to respond? We don't do wildland fire that way. We don't put an engine in every driveway. We have a larger 30,000-foot view of where we need to respond and how much exposure danger we're going to put firefighters in order to accomplish a certain objective. We're not like a structured fire department where we run to your house and put out the fire. It doesn't work that way. So I hesitate to create a community to aggregate. I also worry about creating a community to aggregate information, which is, because it's not accurate, is primarily rumors. Now all of a sudden I have a whole community to monitor and take care of that's full of potentially inaccurate information that I now have to deal with. So I have some issues with that. So, but I do see, well, let me put it this way. If I do get accurate information from somebody, they're probably way too close. If the fire's burning your house, you shouldn't be tweeting and you shouldn't be in there. So, if I do get accurate, I don't really want it anyway. I will say this. I think crowdsourcing is important on a whole nother, and this takes it to a completely different level than actual operational tactical information, and that is because people want and need something to do in a crisis. They need to feel that they're participating and that they're doing something. And so providing these outlets and building a community is how we ratchet down rumor and worry, by providing people a common place to go to share what they do know, to share their worry, to share their concern. And that may mean, as I was discussing with Kate, the thing most people share in fires is pictures. If we can have everybody crowdsource and bring them all together in one spot to share their vision, what they're seeing, what the experience is for them, that's a huge factor in the emotional component that I have to deal with. So I think there's accuracy in that case isn't critical. It's more being able to monitor sort of the emotional state of the community and how they're feeling and what they're feeling threatened with, without having the responsibility to actually respond. I will say that we do have trouble in collaborating with other government agencies in gathering data. The public thinks that we have real-time maps. They say we live in, as I refer to it, a refresh button world. And I had them just yesterday, a family that had their house almost burned, and they said, that map was 4 hours old. I'm thinking, holy cow, that's a new map. I mean, we don't have real-time maps, but because it's only when we fly the fire with IR data at 1 o'clock in the morning and we get infrared back, we get data. But I know there are people who are flying over our fire. The military flies over our fire. They have satellite feeds. Can I get it? No. I don't need all your other stuff. I don't need your secret squirrel things. I just need to know, what do you see in the 5 minutes you're flying over my fire? And we can use that and we could share that. But we have trouble with some of those relationships. Anyway, I just want to add in that that may not come as a surprise that we have problems getting things from the military. But anyway, I just want to share that from a ground pounder standpoint, from a person on the ground, in a very much a first response, category. We're not there in prevention and education. We're not there in recovery. In fact, even evacuation. Once we evacuate you, it's a responsibility. Once we say we need you to evacuate, it's law enforcement and the Red Cross, not ours. We're just trying to direct, confine, contain the fire. And in that sense, I don't know. And I'd be open for ideas about how we could utilize direct citizen information to help with those tactical decisions.
That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd follow that up. Great. So my name is Chris Vaughn. I'm the Geospatial Information Officer for FEMA. I've been in the job about a whopping 2 weeks. So this is going to be very short, I think. But I think I'm exactly opposite of Chris. We're more at the, if she's, did you say 30,000 foot? We're probably at the 30,000 mile level. So we're very much at the hierarchy, trying to figure out how we, FEMA, are part of the team. So we were talking on the phone, I think, just a couple of days ago. Very tactical, operational, strategic, right? And if you look at it that kind of way. So I'm going to talk about three questions and try to frame my response in that way. How do we integrate with citizen-generated data with authoritative data? So the way that, I guess the first thing I'd like to point out is, I think NABSIG is a sponsor of this, right? So on NABSIG, we've put out there the DHS Geospatial Concept of Operations. Has anybody even heard of it, know about it? All three of you, great. Okay, so if you go out there, that's really how FEMA, it was really built for a DHS Homeland Security kind of concept, but it really touches to the all hazards approach of how we handle a disaster. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. In the very back end of that document is a litany of authoritative data sources. So our struggle is, what are we, FEMA, responsible for providing as far as authoritative data structure? And then how can we actually leverage the crowd to fill in the gaps for that? The way that I view crowdsourcing, crowd mapping is really more of a model. And hopefully this will come out clear. During a disaster, we've got a huge modeling community that's trying to tell us where they think that disaster is, and that's coming in from real-time feeds from Weather Service, and then we have a program called HAZUS that we try to refine those feeds. But for me, crisis mapping really fits this unique niche of refining the models into actuals, right? So I think other people have talked about how it's the real-time information immediately following, but then there's a definitive end, right? That's when we fly the planes, and we'll talk a little bit about Civil Air Patrol and how we've been working with them to try to actually define the damage assessments following that. So either planes or more realistically, the ground pounders on the ground that are telling us in real time. It was interesting, Chief Warner was starting to kind of allude to the concept earlier this morning about authoritative crowdsourcing. So I think in the not too distant future, and I really mean like in the next year or two, we will see an influx of local firefighters and or local county emergency management officials using and leveraging this technology and feeding this information back up in real time. The chief talked a little bit this morning about limited budget. Well, developing models or apps or applications that feed this information in, really, the budget really shouldn't be a limiting factor anymore. You got 17-year-old kids that can crank these things out in 30 minutes or less. So it's defining the structure and how do you bring that back in. So that's authoritative crowdsourcing in my mind, is empowering the locals, empowering the county emergency managers to feed that information up the ICS chain of command, of which we subscribe to. So a great example of that, which we're actually leveraging very powerfully, is the National Weather Service's local storm reports. So that's been going on for years, but you're just now starting to see how they're leveraging that, and we're feeding that back up into real time. The second question was, what issues emerge when using data to make operational decisions? So I'm going to take my own penchant on that question and try to redirect it in a way to say, putting on the legal issues and how the government is supposed to act with this to the side, my biggest thing that I see is context. And Kate talked a little bit about it during her panel. What I saw during Hurricane Isaac, if I may for just a second, I saw the GIS community within our world kind of geo-geek it out on the right-hand side. And we were really focused on bringing in all the GIS laters and really doing that. But it was amazing to me that it seemed like the rest of the community, as far as the emergency management community, was having a hard time putting all this stuff into context. So how many layers are too many layers, and how do you tie in, and I'm doing a bad disservice to Kate's earlier presentation, but how do you tie in the operations world with the tech world? And I don't think we've really done a really good job of that yet. I think it will eventually get there, but I was at the Crisis Mappers Conference 2010, I think, in Harvard, and I tried to talk about ICS, and I tried to talk about ESF structures, and I got this blank stare from the tech world. They didn't really want to hear that. So, but if you're talking to the emergency management community, that's the language we speak. You know, so how do we bridge that gap a little bit better? And then is there the possibility of leveraging the crowd to harmonize authoritative information? Chris talked about having a really hard time getting the data out of the federal community or the regular government community, whether it's local, state, emergency, or tribal, I'm sorry. Can they take that information, harmonize it, and put it into structures that we understand? Then the third question is, what methods have agencies put into place to support crowdsourcing? So I'm pretty happy to announce we went out to Camp Roberts. John led an experiment out there where we looked at using existing relationships that we had and looking at it in a new way. And so for the example that we did for Camp Roberts was Civil Air Patrol. So this is a huge volunteer-based organization. They have the right ethos, they have the right penchant, but they're one of many, right? So they're one of many groups. And so we looked at this during the Camp Roberts experiment and looked at a brand new way of doing, and I won't get into the details, I don't know if we'll cover that later, but we looked at a brand new way of doing it with this crowd that we haven't traditionally looked at in this way. I don't know if, and I'm proud to say that we actually executed during Hurricane Isaac in a new way, in a new format. And so basically, from my perspective at FEMA, it's can we relook at the way that we've traditionally looked at these crowds and see if we can leverage the requirements that we have and see what they can do with it. So I think there is a lot of benefit in doing that, and good results will come of it. So that's all I got.
Thank you very much. So we'll turn to the room and to online for some questions. I've got a few of my own, and I'm sure others here from the panel have of each other, but we'll sort of intersperse that and make sure we actually get some comments from people here. So anyone got some questions or follow-ups on some of those? There's at least one online I know of.
So we have a question that actually came in this morning, but I think it's still pertinent now. So David Applegate this morning talked about using human sensors to gather information for analysis and threat prevention to assist with decision-making and agency effectiveness. But what are the different agencies doing to protect personal information, especially if you're using people's private information without their permission? So if you're monitoring the social media feeds.
Who's game enough to take that? Anyone?
Well, I know for the Weather Service, we when we monitor Twitter, we actually set up a program where we encouraged, it was similar to the Tweak the Tweet program. We encouraged people to use a specific hashtag and then include their location within the tweet if they weren't geocoding. And we made sure that that information was never made available on publicly accessible computers. I mean, you could follow the hashtag yourself, and people did, but when we harvested the information, we made sure it stayed on just internal machines that only other Weather Service offices could see. So from that respect, we tried to limit people's personal identifiable information by keeping it only on Weather Service viewable computers. But at the same time, by encouraging them to use a hashtag on Twitter, everybody could see what they were tweeting.
So I should mention that was Shashan in Armenia asked that question.
Very good.
We went through a pretty extensive process with PII. We had to deal with our legal team because what we had was a group of volunteers on the outside who were processing information that may contain information about other people. So you had sort of two sets of personally identifiable information. And we actually had to go through a series of sort of data scrubbing exercises to take out anything that might allow a potential volunteer to learn someone about a potential individual that was involved in this USAID program. Again, I won't get into the details of it. It's in the case study if you need it. But I think that addressing, that's one of the examples where, a lot of the issues that we face, they're not technical, they're organizational, they're political, they're legal. And I think that that's where organizations who want to try and connect with grassroots, the onus is really on us to work through those issues.
There's another question from the Twitters. This is from Nathan Gilead from Apex, North Carolina. Specifically, he asked, would be interesting to hear specific examples of good ideas that aren't allowed by current law. So specifically, where have you run into, like, you wish you could do something, but you are running into policy issues? Obviously, personally identifiable information is one of those, but where else you're like, oh, if I could only do this, but the law isn't there, so what needs to change from a policy perspective to enable that?
Well, I know for me specifically, I found this great new social media platform. It's called Google Plus, and I said, hey, this is great. This is like Twitter and Facebook combined, and it's indexed and searchable. So I had set up my own Google Plus account and started circling people and had a great time. And then I said, hey, this would work great for the Weather Service. So I went to my regional headquarters. I said, hey, can I set up a Google Plus page once they started rolling out pages for our office? My regional headquarters said, sure, you go right on ahead. We'll support you. It went out 2 days later. Somebody at headquarters, and I never knew who it was, but somebody at headquarters did not like that. We weren't approved to do that, and it was shut down. And I've run into another problem I've run into is terms of services. Terms of services has been beaten over my head. We don't have a terms of service with Pinterest, so we can't have a Pinterest page. We don't have a terms of service with Skype, so we can't use Skype operationally. So those are some of the legal issues that the Weather Service has dealt with.
I want to add that anything we can't use, but take that off the plate. Skype, especially, if they find out that we have Skype on the computer, it has something more to do with the peer-to-peer networking, something getting a security issue. So I just stay off VPN and use it anyway. But there are a number of tools we're not allowed to use. In fact, what I find confusing, and this may be typical of many government agencies, who's heard of Nixle? Somebody, yeah, okay. So we're looking for a way. We run into the problem of we send out Gmails to large audiences, and when we get large fires like the Station Fire or the Wallow Fire, where we're affecting 2 states, numerous counties, tons of fire, lots of politicians, we get past the limit on Gmail for sending out stuff, and we max out, and it's usually right in the middle of an evacuation. I'm sorry, you've reached your limit on Gmail. Your email, yeah.
I should note we've been going back and forth a little bit on this same point with you.
And I've been trying to work with Google to find a way to say, could you just in this one instance lift the limit so that we could get this out? But so we said, well, let's try. Nixle came up as an option. It's free. There's unlimited numbers of things you can send out. It'll send to your Twitter page and your Facebook page at the same time. You can do text messages. This is great. Yeah, no, that you can't do that. You can't use it. Well, why? Well, you don't have a contract with them. Well, no. Well, why does that matter? Well, because in a year they could stop offering the service. I said, so what? It's free. I'll use a different one. It doesn't. No, you can't use it. So now they're trying to get a contract for a free service so that we can pay for what's free because goodness knows we wouldn't want to use something that was free. Anyway, we run into those all the time. A lot of it is terms of service agreements that, they make you agree to share your likeness. Well, you can't use a federal government likeness or logo on any other thing. And there's a lot of those things that you run into, that we run into.
Yes, thanks. Hi, this is Michael Grisalfi. I'm a senior advisor at FEMA and the Response Directorate for Whole Community. And I'd like to just I see a bridge between what Chris Erickson said and what Chris Vaughn said. I think, first of all, it's important, Chris, the comments you made about whether indeed a lot of social media is helpful or not coming from the public is really important and not to lose it. An interesting aside that I think is the bridge, I have seen a number of examples, CAL FIRE is one, where typically younger members of the CAL FIRE team are actually using various social media, particularly Twitter, from inside the hot zone to share very specific information. And I think it kind of builds the bridge between both your worlds, because I think and I'm interested in what you both have to say, but I think this is an area that we need to more fully explore, how the responders themselves can be helping to inform the larger audience that might have to get involved if the event expands or cascades in terms of common operational pictures, situational awareness, by using social media inside the impact zone.
I just want to jump in and say that's the number one reason they don't want us to use it, because they are horrified horrified that somebody on the line, and we have firefighters, hotshots do it all the time, are taking pictures and sharing it when they should be fighting fire. It's a safety issue, and realize that, and this is all of this just my opinion, I'm not speaking for the Forest Service, but the idea is that I think the government is not good at accepting that our people are just, oh my God, talking amongst themselves, that we can't have that. We have approved statements here, and you should read this because this is our official statement. And we don't want people on the line inside our operations sending out unapproved information. That's what they have difficulty with, that control of message, especially in an election year. So I'm just saying that's the one. It happens all the time, but usually my approach is in the morning when we do briefing is to say, we know you are, so they're aware that I know that I'm watching them. I see what you're doing, and I would warn you that everything you do, you better be ready to defend in court, because everything you say while you're on this incident is foiable, and everything that you're saying is something we're going to have to react to, and you may have to defend later. So be very careful about what you say, and please do it on your break, not during work time. But it's a huge issue for us, and we don't know how to fix it. That's a big part of the problem.
Well, so I had a slight follow-up question of my own, and as a former first responder, including doing firework in the US, I know some of the things you're talking about. We've got a question coming from the audience there, but it's the bridge to the everyday tool use, which was an interesting thing from earlier that didn't get mentioned, which is that people, first responders, volunteers particularly, use their everyday tools to get the job done during a crisis. The specialist tools that you have to be trained to use are not the ones that people typically pull out. And the use of Twitter, it's not just that they're sharing photos necessarily with outsiders, isn't this cool? You'll actually often get operational coordination done using these tools directly because they don't have access, or it's too slow to use their formal methods. And I think that's a really interesting bridge, because it's not just how to use crowdsourced data in responses. It's actually how to use your extended volunteer networks, or those who are stepping up. Their informal tools are built in. Probably less of a problem for well-trained formal agencies than those groups like the Red Cross, which are built out of volunteer networks who don't have access to the formal tools. There just aren't enough of them. And I said once in public that I've never run a disaster response assessment successfully using electronic digital assessment tools, because there was never enough. Right? It was never right to use. They were never easy enough to use. They were never there when you needed them. That's just sort of a comment, statement, so handing over. Unless there's a response from our folks here, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to make a real quick comment. I think, senior leaders, personal opinion, 2 years ago, looked at social media, they knew it was there, and they were trying to pay attention. I think that game has completely changed. I think there's a very passionate desire to dig deep and try to figure out what are the policy blockers, what is not allowing us to use this more operationally. And I think, the wheels of government turn very slowly. So in the very near future, I think in 2, 3, 5 years, hopefully, we'll have all that bureaucraticness worked out, adjusted. Yeah.
I think it's useful to make one observation here that I kind of wondered about this term authoritative crowdsourcing, and we're talking about someone who's maybe a responder in your organization responding to you. To me, that's not really connecting grassroots to government. That's just what I would call government coordination. And we certainly, I struggle with that a lot. My colleagues at Humanitarian Information Unit at NGA's R3, we have to find a lot of workarounds just to work around to do non-crisis sharing. But again, I think it's important to note that in the context of this, that's really our responsibility to fix. And that when you're talking about communicating with your own people in the field, that's a pretty different question than how do we connect to a volunteer community? How do we connect to someone who's just heard about it and might be supplying information? I think you may have some overlap of questions, but those are two pretty different situations. I think it's worth kind of parsing those out.
Okay, thanks. Very well point that you make there. And when you were talking about responding in social media, as far as the officials and the government collecting that information and digesting it and responding, they don't necessarily need to be the the experts in social media. So I have a question with this, but I wanted to say that there's a difference between the I'm Kat Graham with Humanity Road.
I should have actually said, could everybody please introduce themselves when
So
they're asking?
But there's a difference between, in social media, there's a difference between the recovery, rescue, search and rescue period,
and the recovery period. And that makes a difference in what traffic's in social media and what you want out of social media. And it also makes a difference on whether or not a crisis map is needed, as you know, Google knows with the response that they do, or not. So the question I have is, when traditionally the maps so far have been organic in nature and spontaneous, coming out in different areas. Mostly we see a trend coming out in traditional media. So in Chicago, in Tuscaloosa, and even in Christchurch, the traditional media had launched one, then combined with crisis mapping. So where would the panel decide, what would you recommend that this crisis mapping would be transitioned to in placement as a collaborative effort in the Emergency Planning Center, in the Emergency Management Agency, in the local volunteers like CERT or the Air Rescue Civil Patrol, or with traditional media? Who runs the map? If someone's going to do that crisis map, in a large event, it's shown that it's needed. With Christchurch, the predominant use of that was through web form, not through SMS. So it was the public using it and empowering the public as a neighbor-to-neighbor initiative, which helped reduce the demand. So where do you think that type of effort would be best situated?
If I can add to that, perhaps it's the same thing, which is where does it sit in NIMS? I mean, you deal with this every day in your public communications, but in a national emergency management, incident management structure, who's the point for monitoring that? Who's the point for bringing someone in to operate that?
Well, I mean, it would under ICS, it's always in your plans unit has the mapping function, and whether that's at the national level or whether it's down at the specific level, that's where it would come. But I can't imagine our planning unit on the ground assimilating and using that kind of data. But at the national level, I think it's very possible.
I think you can obviate that question by not saying who is going to run the map or the viewer through which you view the data, but what data can be released so that everyone can use it for their own purposes. You know, if you lock everyone into one way of seeing things through this viewer, through this map, it may or may not serve everybody's needs. But if I say, well, I'm going to create this map, this is what we did with our data here. You know, you can go online and you can look at our map and our viewer. If you don't want to mess with that, you don't have to. You can go get the data and put them in whatever system you want. I mean, we have volunteers now that respond saying, well, I took your data and I'm visualizing it with some sort of graphic thing. It's not a map. They don't want to see the map. They want to just crunch stats on it. So I think maybe one just possible suggestion is to not try and have a one map that binds them all, but think about sharing your data.
Good morning, Eric Rasmussen. Many of us in the room have had to extract from the events lessons to be learned and training to be incorporated. And a number of us have had to answer to grand juries with sentences that always end with "Your Honor." It is now so that there is a huge swirl of social media documentation of things as they're happening, as citizens see them, and sometimes as responders see them talking with one another. Can you talk a little bit about the place of social media for accountability and for reconstruction?
That's a huge issue for us. And it's something we're just beginning to address because we're just delving into, actually, this is the first year. We did some last year, social media really, but this is the first year it's been much heavier use. And our issue is, how do we document? We had a lot of, I know Jeff Phillips and we had a lot of conversation a year ago on the Shadow Lake fire in Oregon when we first used the VOS. The idea was, if our conversation with our virtual operations support team is on a Skype chat, do we have to save that for documentation? I don't know. Does it? And we did, just because we wanted to be as much on the up and up as we could, but there's no rules about it. And we've experimented with a few things for how do we document what we're doing? Do we take a picture of the Facebook page every day? Do we copy every single tweet? How much goes in, how much doesn't? At the moment, we we used something called KeepStream to push URLs over, but it only kept the URLs. Then it was a 2-day process to open them all and document them into Adobe Pro. That was a little labor intensive. And then we talked about Storify. Then we've done some experimenting with Pinterest. Could you just push the URLs over to Pinterest and then save the Pinterest? Well, URLs break. And so, you know, we're still trying to work that out. How do we do it? What part do we save? And my feeling about, and this is only me, about the Facebook page and the Twitter account and the Google Plus account and the blog or whatever it is we put together is I have done screen captures when a to call, for lack of a better term, incident within an incident happens. If we're starting an evacuation and things are spinning up pretty quickly, I start capturing some page traffic just in case, because those are the situations that come back in lawsuits. And it's when did you tell us? When were we notified? When did the information go out? So I try to time capture those sorts of things, but really a print screen is about the only thing I have at the moment. I know it's kind of analog these days, but if anyone has any solutions, that is we're still trying to resolve that. And I don't know if Jeff will have anything more to offer on that, but we don't have an answer yet. But if you have one, I'll take it.
Well, I know in the Weather Service, it was required of us to archive our Facebook page. And finally, somebody kind of pointed out, Facebook does that for you. And they basically keep it all. So we were, instead of print screening, we were saving to a PDF. And that seemed to work for a while. But then that finally people just weren't doing it. And they finally said, you know what, we'll just let Facebook take care of this. And it's been fine ever since. As far as Twitter goes, tweets are a little more timely, and they tend to disappear. So for our one weather report project, we were archiving them ourselves. And so we were actually pulling out the tweets and saving them to a database so that we could access them further. And then that goes to speak because there's one thing for the Weather Service as far as we using tweets and Facebook posts during an actual event, but a lot of times we're too busy to actually monitor social media platforms. And we put out a lot of warnings. Well, then we want to be able to go back and say, was there actual reports of information that we need? So we do need to come up with a way that we can pull this information out and archive it so that we can do a post assessment and go back and see if we can verify some of our warnings. Did the weather actually happen that we were warning on?
Yep.
I'll just briefly, while they're passing the mic, I think one interesting thing to note there with what you're talking about, documenting information and whether or not that's going to be something that you see again in front of a judge. Again, I think it's useful to kind of think about that in two ways. At least from my perspective, from the U.S. Agency for International Development, we're very, very interested in trying to be more transparent about our data and communicating with people. So if my colleagues and I have to use non-standard tools to communicate, that's one type of concern. But another concern about not just using social media tools, but actually using the society behind them to get information and talk about what you're doing. I think there's a bigger question there about what transparency means and the decision-making process, and this question about ethics, and do I have to, if it gets captured that someone sent me information, am I legally obligated to respond to that? Am I not? And what does that mean? So again, not an answer, but a big policy challenge that can be seen from a few different angles.
I had a direct follow-up to that actually in the USAID context, which is it's my understanding there's actually a piece of legislation passed the House and is before the Senate, which is requiring a percentage of USAID funds to actually go towards either surveying or finding out and collecting information from beneficiaries directly and then actually reporting back each year on what you did with it, right? And I don't know quite how it's framed in terms of this is just a traditional after-action survey, or is this actually something that's much more real-time, right? But it's potentially about to become a legal requirement that the Secretary of State reports back or the Administrator reports back on exactly this. And it's going to be really interesting to see I'm really for it because it's about accountability. It's actually saying we actually need to say, what did we do? Did we listen, right? Did we look at the impact we had in more than just some 2-year later evaluation? But I think that's a trendsetter for things we're going to see more and more across all agencies. I don't know whether you knew or saw.
I'm
what
not
I'm talking about.
specifically familiar with that. I definitely noted it. I will be looking it up almost immediately. I can say that I know.
God.
Yeah, exactly. Oh no! Wait a minute. But ours is all online, Nigel. It's all free. You can get it. I know that this administration takes transparency very seriously. Ultimately, I won't get too far into it, but there's a lot of data that are collected. There's a lot of conversations that happen with beneficiaries that aren't captured in a centralized, standardized way. So this is where I get back to some of this it's not necessarily about connecting grassroots to government, it's about connecting government to government. And that's our responsibility to do that more efficiently.
The online question.
Yeah, so I actually have a personal question I'd like to ask you guys, but I'll wait for the coffee break or something. But so the question is coming from Per in Norway, and the class that he's in is Tech Tools and Skills for Emergency Management. Yeah, so the question is, it takes it a little bit of a different direction, but I'm kind of interested in seeing your responses. His question is, do you have considerations on how the rapidly collected information through social media in a crisis also can be misused by groups or individuals that have intentions that contradict saving lives, protecting property, etc.? And examples could be looting, militia groups, etc.
I know for the Weather Service, we have built into the Weather Service is a system that's called NWS Chat. And basically, it allows all forecast offices and emergency managers and media, we can all are in one chat room. And there's certain rules and things about what you can post in there, when you can post it, and the thinking goes that if they're like the Hurricane Center says, in a couple hours we're going to issue a hurricane watch for such and such a location in South Carolina. Well, that gives somebody an advantage. There's a financial advantage to knowing that there's going to be a hurricane watch or hurricane warning issued well ahead of time. So long-term watches and warnings are not allowed to be posted. We do for short fused warnings. I do take, if I have a forecaster say I'm going to issue a warning on this storm, I'm over there tweeting it and chatting it right as they're issuing it, because that's critical information that needs to go out right then. So yeah, it is an issue that the Weather Service has looked at and is aware of, that providing this information real time, real quick can actually give a leg up on people who want to either nefariously or on the just trying to be good business people to take advantage of that information.
We do have some issues, especially in regards to looting. That's always a problem in evacuated areas, and it's a perceived problem. We don't, I should say, we don't always have the problem of looting because we have law enforcement wherever we go. So, but I do know of the people that come into an area specifically because they know no one is going to be in that area. However, usually they're not in that area because there's a roaring, flaming front, which discourages a lot of people from going in. So, but not always. Some are willing to go regardless of the danger. I would say our biggest danger is that now having social media platforms allows people a platform for their anti-government rants. And we operate in a lot of very small, rural, backwoods areas where there are a lot of anti-government people that don't like us there anyway. And it provides them a very open platform to make those kind of comments. And which we dealt with just recently on the Berry Point fire. I think we had 82 comments in a string from a rather vocal person. And I will say the community policed itself in a very interesting way. And I will say that even having the anti-government rants or the bad things happen allowed for the good comments to come out that probably wouldn't have come out in defense of what we were doing, which I thought was very interesting when we just let it go. So.
Our legal team was very, very concerned about USAID releasing information, and even though it wasn't crisis information, that if we were going to involve grassroots entities to treat that it would not be overtaken by mysterious, nefarious forces. So we built in a lot of checks and balances. Our colleagues at NGAR3 helped us do some automated checks and balances. And then we had the GIS Corps did a very thorough accuracy assessment, and we specifically asked both of those groups to see if they could see anything that would lead them to believe that there might be people gaming the system or purposefully inputting bad information. I also spot checked it on myself again. The methodology is all in the case study. We didn't find any evidence of that. I think this morning the question was asked, we talk about this, are we perceiving it as more than it should be? I can't really respond to that. I think that there's definitely a concern there. But we actually had the same experience that Chris did, that we were advertising this event on Facebook and advertising on Twitter, and there were some comments that came back that were, they were just kind of off the hook comments. And I actually thought that that was good. I liked seeing that. Like, why not? We're your government, your taxes pay for us. And then to see that conversation happen a little bit, I think is helpful. I think Andy Carvin for NPR has done a lot of interesting work about using information that he gets from the crowd and having it revalidated by the crowd. I think some of the statistical methods that Rob Monroe spoke about. I think we're getting towards a lot of ways to start to deal with this. I would question if it's as big an issue as we think it is.
Dan Sui from Ohio State. So before this online question, I was about to use one finger, but after this online question, I'm learning the Wilson Center culture, and I'm using 2 fingers. I'm the first one using 2 fingers. So it's a follow-up question. I think so far the discussion so far this morning has all have this implicit assumption that connecting to grassroots is good, and involving the public and the volunteer in emergency situations is beneficial. But just to follow up on this online question, I think in many emergency situations, sometimes involving the public, connecting the grassroots could be problematic. I would like to use the example of the Sichuan earthquake 4 years ago in China. That's one of the most devastating earthquakes happened recently, and the Chinese government, as part of the rescue efforts, mobilized 100,000 troops, rushed into the scene. But what the government did not anticipate was the social media, the internet has already mobilized 200,000 overzealous volunteers. So they rushed onto their cars, bring whatever they have, jammed the highway. So it created a big headache. And so it's delayed in from multiple directions of Wenchuan city. They delayed the real rescue team. And plus also the various websites have put up all different sorts of misinformation that in many ways deterred the relief effort rather than being helpful. So where I'm getting, in the real emergency rescue effort situation, how do we better coordinate the public participation, grassroots, so that the professional rescue teams versus the public can each play proper role?
Take a shot at that. It'd be a very short. For us, it kind of goes back to Shadrach. If we can be transparent with our data and share that we are responding and how we're responding, hopefully that will let the people who don't feel we're responding know what we're up to. Is that maybe a fair response to that? There are very formalized structures that do respond, but it's only been really recently that we've been able to share so much information back out with the public. So I think it's this give, push, pull kind of relationship going on that, for us, if we can get an image and show where the flood is, right, and you can see the extent, maybe everybody that is worried about their house won't come rushing back into where the flood was. They can see their house is dry, or maybe it isn't dry, and they take it for what it is.
I'd probably make another comment, which is I think Chris actually did address your comment earlier with the fact that she spends, there's a bunch of the conversation that is not actually relevant to the emergency response for fires particularly. So I think there has been discussed a bit already in the panel. I wanted to get a little bit at the transparency piece, which is that it's not enough to just take the information in, right, and do it for your own analysis, because you've got to get stuff back out there. And as you commented, it's got to get back out quickly and urgently. And for Google, as a consumer of National Weather Service, USGS data, our public alerting project is explicitly this. We're now push alerting through to handsets, and sort of in parallel with what CMAS is doing. And I think it's really interesting that when you look at the way that's reported, retweeted, and even the existing Twitter accounts and so forth from USGS, And even when you go to the Philippines, where the official hotline for the Philippine government in the recent Manila floods was a Twitter hashtag, right? There was no phone number, there was just a Twitter hashtag. What you see, I think, is that when you look at the influencers and the influence scores, that people want the authoritative information to reshare, right? And I think this goes back to this New Zealand comment I mentioned at the start, which is even simply putting qualifiers in place starts to convey nuance in the messaging around what you're doing and how you do it. And that demand and thirst for knowledge of those networks for action, where you can guide action, I think is really important. And people will, another stat I don't have an exact reference, but there's been some analysis to show that corrections actually travel faster than the initial rumor in terms of the way they're spreading on social networks. So there is some evidence to show that if you correct a mistake, it actually does travel quicker than the initial one. It might still be, we were mentioning earlier, hours can make a difference in many circumstances. But I think that's a sort of an encouraging statistic in many cases. And it's not just disaster rumors, it's other kind of rumors as well. We are basically out of time. I think we're pretty much at time. I'm wondering if there's a last question or a comment from the audience. Everybody's got their hands up. So I'll pick the gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Glenn Reese from Digital Globe, and I'm the product manager for our crisis event service. I just wanted to comment on how we use crowdsourcing. We use it when there's an initial disaster to try to focus our sensors. And then additionally, after the disaster has occurred, we'll work with crowd ranking and microtasking to try to provide additional insight to that imagery. Some of the challenges we run into is really first responders are the only people within those areas. So some concepts we've been working on is maybe considering having first responders maybe not involved in those incidents being part of the microtasking, where we actually chip out the imagery and ask them to do their analysis to feed it back into the system. So I don't know if that's been thought about or if been considered amongst the community at all.
I can take that for a shot. I think there's the, if we just get a picture and get it to the first responder, they're going to do something. I think we need to consider that they're actually standing on the ground looking at the burning house, and to ask them to take off their big fire-resistant glove and push the button to feed information back. I think that's a little much personally. But I think what that image does is if you bump it back a scale and bump it up to the local county EOC or to the state EOC, that helps guide the resources appropriately, whether or not we've got too much or we need to send more. Probably more of the concept of pulling back, because we're going to send, forces in, not forces, that's the wrong word, help, resources.
Well, we did something in Waldo Canyon, and we had first responders that were actually giving that information within that area, but also out of California, where they weren't involved in that response, they were providing feedback. So I can appreciate the concerns with the responder being in that area, but it was interesting, the people that stepped forward that had the expertise but weren't actually responding to that event. Just kind of, an idea kind of caught our attention. They were emergency responders, they had a background, they're able to, I think we've seen authoritative sources. Our challenge we have is we get all these points and we don't want to put them onto the platform, so we misguide you and say, hey, this area, New Orleans was the most recent event where we were kind of playing with these ideas. But we're very interested in it. I think it's extremely powerful, just understanding how to manage the quality.
I just want to add in that one problem that we'd have, like you were mentioning with the first responders, is probably 80% of the time we're in no cell service, no internet service area. We're kind of stuck. That's why we have radios. What we support, our interconnectivity can't be web-based at this time because our focus is on things like repeaters for radios. We support that system to make sure people are connected, but the idea, we don't even allow everybody in the agency to have smartphones, so much less be able to, So we're so far behind the curve on that being able to do that on any large-scale basis would be hard.
So I got my own two-finger NIMS follow-up, right? So, planning is really where this all fits into NIMS. Maybe that's where we should be targeting all this information to the GIS analyst in the planning section, and that is very scalable across all the different levels. And GIS folks are geeky by nature, right? So I'm a GIS guy, and we're all, hopefully I don't offend anybody by saying that. But we want to be able to take the information and then turn that back out. Where it fits in the planning structure, though, is the plans influence how the response operations go next. So if you get it in front of those response operators, you can tell them in a very formalized fashion how they can go and construct that next day operation. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay. I think we're basically at time and wrap up, and I want to sort of give a thank you to all the panelists for being, I think, very open and sharing some of the challenges that you're seeing as they come through. And I had one final point, really to reinforce that last piece there about ingestion into the planning cycle and the need for filtering and analysis, which we didn't really talk about the tools for aggregation and doing the smart work on top of the stream, if you like, which I'm a little bit surprised by because it's such a massive challenge for anyone looking at it. And there are a lot of opportunities I'm sure we'll talk about later. And it's simply that as a former first responder, both in fires and then internationally in the UN, it is the overwhelming fire hose of both tasks you have to do every day plus data coming into you from all sources is the reason there are incident command systems, and is the reason why simply checking into the stream yourself is incredibly attractive to get a sense of what's happening, but you can't ask people in the middle of a crisis reacting to really pull their heads up too far. And so it's all about assisting that. And that's, I think, where the advantage is, and that's the core of the questions, hopefully.
I think. No.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Wow. I'm Leah Shanley. I'm the director of the Commons Lab, and I would like to applaud the fantastic panels this morning. If everyone show their appreciation. Also like to thank the online audience who's borne with some of the technical difficulties but still contributed questions and comments. To Tech Change in the back, who's been very good about helping us monitor the social media feeds and getting their students involved in classes around the world. I think they said 150 students in 30 countries have been following these presentations. We have lunch upstairs on the 6th floor. There's a small showcase room. People have got some demos of their projects, so we encourage you to walk through those and talk to folks in more depth. And for the folks online, we will be offline for the next hour or so, and then back down here at 1 o'clock for the session. Thank you very much.